Alright, so let's continue on with the Vimshottari Nakshatra Dashas course. Currently we're looking at the 6th house and influences on the 6th house. Now, I have a lot of notes here about the 6th house. We're not going to get to them all in this video, but remember, I will post my notes below the video in a blog at AshevilleVedicAstrology.com. So once this is up on YouTube, give me a day or so, and then go to AshevilleVedicAstrology.com and look for the newest blog post, and it will say 6th house, and it'll give a list of these principles that we're going over, a more full detailed list. And you have to remember these are coming from Sarvarta Chintamani. All right, so that's where I'm getting the inspiration for this particular series. So, what does the 6th house represent? Enemies, debts, thieves, injury, sorrow, the navel region, diseases, obstacles, all the things that get in the way of our path in life, or at least the path as we'd like to see it. But we have to pay off these debts in the same way that the 6th house is related to Saturn. We can bemoan where Saturn is placed, or say that Saturn is causing us all kinds of grief. But really, if we treat Saturn in its highest and clearest fashion, what Saturn is doing is pointing us to those areas of life where we need to pay attention to where we are not quite as skillful as we need to be. Or it represents the debts that we have to pay off so as we can move forward with our life. And that's very similar to the 6th house here, as it shows the kind of debts, the enemies, the obstacles we have to overcome by things we've put into play from the past, whether it's activities which have hurt others, or just negative thinking, or bad choices in life. Those are all things that can cause obstacles, so it doesn't have to be some evil force out there causing us to sin. It can simply be bad choices, or not being very coherent on our path. That can relate to the 6th house. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into some of the principles that Sarvarta Chintamani shares here. The first thread, the first rule, deals with enemies. And this is a beautiful rule because it allows us to see, are we going to have a lot of enemies in our life or not? Exclusive influence of benefic planets on the 6th house indicates an absence of enemies. Malefic influences to the 6th house and its lord creates enemies. It's very simple. What that tells us is that if there are benefic influences to the 6th house and to the lord of the 6th house, more than likely, we won't have too many problems with enemies. If the malefic influences to the 6th house and its lord are stronger, then that creates enemies. And one of the other principles shows who will prevail over enemies. And it said that to determine if the native or the enemies will prevail, we need to first see if the ascendant and its lord are stronger, or if the 6th house and the 6th house lord are stronger. All right? That's beautiful. That tells us. When someone asks you, am I going to overcome these enemies? Well, you look to see who's stronger, the ascendant and the ascendant lord, or the 6th house and the 6th lord. Someone asks you a prajna question. Beautiful way to use prajna, horary astrology. They're going into a battle, they're going into a court case, or they're going to argue with their coworker or something like that. They want to know who's going to prevail. Well, at that moment you create the chart, see who's stronger. See if the ascendant is stronger and the ascendant lord, or see if the 6th lord and 6th house is stronger. That'll tell you who will prevail over this. Now, you can determine the types of enemies by looking at the nature of planets aspecting the houses, the 6th house, and looking at the houses that those planets rule. Okay, so essentially, you determine the nature of one's enemies by seeing the planets aspecting the 6th house and the houses that those planets rule and the sign of the 6th house. Okay, so let's take a look at this chart here. We have the 6th house is Libra. All right. We have Mars in the 6th house. We have Sun in the 6th house. What's that going to tell us? Well, first of all, it tells us this person does have some enemies to overcome because these are primarily malefic influences on the 6th house. And we see that when it comes to aspects to this house, There are no Rashi aspects. There is only Mars, Sun, and Rahu in the 6th. Now, where are these enemies going to come from? Well, they can be hidden enemies because Mars rules the 12th house. They can be a person's spouse or intimate relationships because Mars rules the 7th house. They could even be one's mother or one's immediate family because the Sun rules the 4th house. Now, this is also falling in the sign of Libra, which is the natural 7th sign of the zodiac, which is going to tell us that this person's enemies are primarily going to come from, probably, intimate partners or people that they relate with on kind of a love relationship, a love level. And why is that? Because we not only see that the 6th house is Libra, but we have the confluence of having the 7th Lord in the 6th house. So remember that. Libra is the natural 7th sign of the zodiac. This is why the signs become very important. And within this person's chart, the 7th Lord is in the 6th. Okay, so this helps us to see where the potential difficulties might come, where the enemies might arise from. Now, some more principles, general principles. If the 6th Lord is in the ascendant with a malefic planet, or the 6th Lord is in the 8th house with a malefic, this can indicate wounds or boils in the body. The Lord of the 6th, located in the 10th with a malefic, and under the aspect of malefics, gives the same results. So we're going to see that as we go through these indications, these 6th house indications, there will be a combination of both dealing with enemies as well as health-related issues, wounds. We also need to remember that the 6th house is an upachaya house. It is a growing house, which means that if we can bring our conscious attention to the house, what that allows us to do is to see what are the debts we need to pay off, what are the things we need to be aware of based on the planets within the 6th house, influence in the 6th house, that we need to grow, that we need to become more conscious of. Because as an upachaya house, as a growing house, we're given the capacity to pay off those debts and move forward. So the 6th house is difficult, but if we pay attention to it, it can also allow us to see what we need to do to move forward in a healthy fashion. Those things that we need to make peace with, that we need to face, so that we can be more successful within our life and our chosen path. So always remember that about the 6th house. It is a difficult house, but it's also a growing house. It helps us to become stronger if we give proper time and attention to the influences there. Now, in relationship to the past statement, wounds to the father would be predicted by the influence of the 6th Lord on the Lord and significator of father. The same would be applied to lords and houses related to other people. The intensity of the malefic influences will show the intensity of the affliction. So what is this saying? Well, if we have the 6th Lord on the Lord of the planet that represents the Father, and we see difficult influences towards the significator of the Father, namely the Son, the Father is an authority figure, then this could show difficulties for the Father, afflictions, health afflictions to the Father. And the same would be true if we had the 6th Lord influencing other significators or other areas of the chart that are ruled over by people. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, if we had the 6th Lord Venus in this chart, if we had the 6th Lord Venus influencing the 3rd house or the moon or Mars, now 3rd house deals with, we'll say, brothers at this point in time. Since moon rules the 3rd house, it deals with brothers, and Mars is the natural karaka, the indicator of brothers in the 3rd house. So we see afflictions from the 6th Lord to these 3 points within the chart, and that's going to tell us that there's going to be difficulty towards that person in our life. So of course, we need to know what each house represents. You can go back to previous videos on this channel, go through each house we've already done in the free 52 session video series that you can find under the playlists of this YouTube channel. And that'll give you some sense of who are we talking about when we're looking at different house lords. Or you could get The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2, where in the very back there's a whole appendix filled with karakas and indicators of who rules what and how. So this can help to increase your knowledge. Now, we can also go on to see the part of the body which will suffer. So the part of the body which suffers will be indicated by the planet in an afflicted sixth house. All right, so listen to this one more time. The part of the body which suffers will be indicated by the planet in the afflicted sixth house. Now, Sarvarta Chintamani gives these particular correlations. So if you have these planets in an afflicted sixth house, a sixth house which is being negatively Rashi aspected, then there might be difficulty with these planets and with the things that they represent. So the sun is said to represent the head and the sides of the body. The moon is said to represent the face and the eyes. Mars is said to represent the neck and the feet. Mercury is said to represent the ears and the intestines. Jupiter relates to the nostrils and or the belly. Venus is the genital region. So if you get an afflicted sixth house, one of these planets in that sixth house, according to Sarvarta Chintamani, this can give a difficulty with that aspect of the body. Now, the Lord of the Ascendant, Mars and Mercury, located together in the 4th or 12th houses, and influencing the 6th house. This can give diseases in the lower portion of the body. Sarvarta Chintamani says near the rectum, or first chakra issues. Now let's jump back a minute to this idea of difficulties. Now, if we look at this chart, because we can use this as an example, I would say probably that this is an afflicted 6th house, because of having Mars, Sun, and Rahu, which is a Lajatadiya Vashta of shame in the 6th house. So it's going to give some serious difficulties for 6th house affairs. But we also see the 6th Lord is debilitated. Venus is debilitated in Virgo. Now, so we have the Sun, which can give difficulties with the person's head or the sides of their body. Mars is said to represent the neck and the feet. And Rahu only makes this worse. So this person can have difficulties with this. We can also look to other areas of what these things might represent. The sun deals with our general vitality. It can deal with our heart. Mars can deal with the energetic system of the body. It can also deal with the nervous system. So we need to remember these things. As you're going through learning astrology, think about things you've learned elsewhere and see if they apply in the situations as you study them. Okay, so let's continue on. Moon, Mercury, and the Lord of the Ascendant, together with Rahu or Ketu in any sign, is said to indicate leprosy. The limb afflicted would be indicated by the sign. When Mars adds malefic influence, the leprosy comes from defective bile. And we have to remember that this is a bit of an old book, so I'm going to assume that this is dealing with the liver and the gallbladder. When Saturn adds malefic influence, this combination is a result of cold and dryness. So maybe a person gets eczema or some kind of skin condition because their skin is not well hydrated. When Sun adds malefic influence to this combination, it is the result of blood pollution. So the body not being able to purify itself, the blood essentially. Now if this combination appears in the first house, leprosy would be throughout the body. Now why is this? Because the first house itself represents the body. Okay, so the first house represents the body itself. So when we have afflictions specifically to the first house, that's going to make the leprosy or the skin condition, the difficulty, throughout the entire body. All right. Now, again, we have a similar principle repeating itself. Should this combination influence the Lord of the 9th house and the Sun, leprosy or the skin condition would be to the father. Now why is that? Because the 9th house and the Sun, according to this text, represents the father. The same could be applied for other people related to the native based on the same house and indicator being afflicted in this way. It's the same thing. If we have these influences, and instead of on the 9th house in the sun, let's say it's a heterosexual male's chart, and it's to the 7th house in Venus, well, the affliction could be to the spouse. So we can look at things in this way. We can see other areas, other people in a person's chart in this way. Now, you can go ahead and refer to the blog post at Asheville Vedic Astrology for more influences to the 6th house for health. I'm not going to go through them all, but there are numerous ones here. But let's go over a few more little points. So the Lagna Lord and the 6th Lord with Mercury shows mental troubles. The Lagna Lord with Mercury shows mental troubles. The Lagna Lord and 6th Lord, pardon me. The Lagna Lord and 6th Lord with Mercury shows mental troubles. Why would that be the case? Because Mercury is our capacity to process information. And if we can't see things clearly, or if we can't process information clearly, if we're not able to cognize things well, then we have mental troubles. However, having the Lagna Lord and 6th Lord associated with Jupiter, this can show an absence of disease, Why is that? Because Jupiter is the great benefic, and he allows us to, hopefully, as long as he's not severely afflicted, to have wisdom to make choices which prevents disease within our body. So Mercury can be very good in this regard. If the Lagna Lord and 6th Lord are associated with Venus, the trouble can come from women or urinary troubles. Why? Because in the chart, both Venus represents urinary issues as well as women in general. If we have the Lagna Lord and 6th Lord with Mercury also associated with Saturn, troubles come from nervousness and anxiety, because these are things that Saturn produces. Now, Lagna Lord, the Ascendant Lord, and those of you who may not be familiar with this terminology, although I think you might be by now, the Ascendant, the Lagna, the rising sign, those are all the same thing. But the Lagna Lord and 6th Lord with Rahu or Ketu can give trouble from thieves, snake bites, fire, and nervous disorders. Now again, when will all of this come to fruition? It'll all come to pass when you are running the dasha of the planet involved. So previous, if we're running a dasha of the Lagna Lord and the 6th Lord, so in this chart, it would be Venus dasha for this person, because the Lagna Lord and the 6th Lord are the same. And we see that this Lagna Lord and 6th Lord, the body and health, are debilitated. So Venus dasha is particularly difficult for this individual. If we just have the Lagna Lord and Mercury, so if Mercury is with the 6th Lord, which he's not here, but if he was, then we'd say Venus-Mercury would be the time that we would see nervous troubles. Why? Because, again, Venus rules the 6th house and the 1st, and that would be the 6th Lord and the 1st with Mercury. So that would be the dasha that we would find these troubles. Okay. Now, some other principles that come from Sarvarta Chintamani. If the Lord of the 7th and Venus are in the 6th house, this can contribute to sterility of the spouse. The Lord of the 7th and Venus in the 6th can contribute to sterility, difficulty having children, or difficulty being creative with one's spouse. Imprisonment can be predicted for other family members. If the Lord of the 6th, Saturn and Rahu, and the Lord of the house indicating the family member are all combined. Right? So if we get the Lord of the 6th, Saturn and Rahu, and the Lord of the house indicating that family member, if they're all combined, that can indicate imprisonment. Why is that? Because Saturn and Rahu are said to be very restricting influences. And to go along with that, if the Lords of the 6th house and the Ascendant are in an angle or trine with Saturn, this indicates imprisonment. Rahu combined with this combination makes it doubly so. Now why is that? Because the angles are the active places within our life, those things where we like to accomplish things, do things, it's activity. So if we have the 6th house Lord, the obstacles, the delays, the setbacks, with Saturn and Rahu in an angle, then that's putting obstacles and restrictions against our path in life. Now again, you can say that this will be imprisonment, and it very well may be. I often like to see the 12th Lord get involved in that. But what it can mean is that there can be lots of obstacles a person has to overcome to move forward with their path in life. And again, we have to remember, as I mentioned earlier, that Saturn shows where we need to take responsibility and where we have debts to pay off. So if you want to move forward in your life, what you need to do is find the houses that Saturn's placed in, whatever angle that house is placed in, and attend to that house. Look at it like you don't know anything about it. Get all kinds of expert advice. Figure out what you need to do to work hard to make that house function well, whether it's learning to be appropriate in relationships, 7th house, to take care of the body and your health, the 1st house, to be proactive in the world, not lazy in the world, 10th house. Working in this way can help you pay off that karmic debt indicated by Saturn and Rahu so that you can move forward along your path in life. So we need to keep that in mind. Okay, so let's keep on going down here. Let's find some more of the more interesting combinations. And using this chart, one of the things that we can see, just as an example, is this is a chart of a person who had lymphoma cancer. And you can see that health is quite a big issue. All these planets in the 6th house, they're all malefics. They're causing that Lajatati Avashta of shame. And we remember that shame doesn't have to mean that you are shameful, in the Puritan sense. It just can be an area of life where you feel shame, where you feel you should be able to do better, to achieve more, or society itself might not treat you so nicely. That's for other areas. But when we're thinking about health here, a person can be very ashamed of their situation, or people having to take care of them. We see the 6th Lord is debilitated in Virgo here. We see that we have the 12th Lord in the 6th. We see that Jupiter, even though it's in its own home in Sagittarius, it's still in the 8th house. So that's good. That can show a person growing from the traumas and the difficulties because it's in good dignity, but it's still going to give problems. And one of the things that we can see is through Rashi aspects, how are things going to work? Well, remember, the 6th house deals with those debts we have to pay off, those things we have to grow through or learn from to move forward in our life. And we see that there are no positive Rashi aspects. And those of you who are not familiar with the term Rashi aspects, please Google it or find videos on this channel, because these are not the typical planetary aspects that you're probably used to using. I don't think too many people actually use them that well or at all. But the Rashi aspects to this, we see that there are no good ones, and there are only malefics to the 6th house. Yet, we see that the karaka of health and longevity, maybe not health, but longevity, is Saturn, and it's in its own home in the 9th. So this person hangs on. They're going to be able to hang on and get through it. And we see that Jupiter is getting Rashi aspected by a benefic. It's Venus, and yes, it's in bad dignity, but it's still getting Rashi aspected by Venus. And it's getting Rashi aspected by nearly full moon, which is also a benefic. So when it comes to longevity, the body's capacity to hopefully deal with it and move forward, there's a lot of promise here. But they do have to go through a lot of suffering, which is the 6th house influence. So the time periods, obviously, to be aware of are Venus dashas, Venus, Mars, Sun, Rahu dashas, Venus, Sun, Mars, Rahu dashas. There's a lot of Venus dashas here that are going to be indicative of difficulty for this individual, and that's been true. Now, Jupiter dashas, Jupiter moon dashas, these can be better for the longevity. And this is how we can break it down to see these certain things. Okay. Now, anyway, moving on. So there's another chart I wanted to look at. Let's see if I can find it here. Okay, it's not that one. There we are. Okay, so this is another chart. And this deals primarily with enemies. So let me go through the remainder of the principles I have here that I want to cover for today. And then we'll look at this chart in relationship to enemies to see how we can see it make sense. Now, dealing with enemies. The Lord of the 6th house, located in a Kendra, and under the aspect of malefics, or if there are a lot of malefics in the 6th house, one has trouble from enemies. So here we have the 6th house lord, Saturn, in the 1st. That's an angle. It's also dealing with the body. So this person definitely has troubles from enemies. All right, there are no other planets. So Jupiter's in the 4th. And the influences to this Saturn coming from Mars, which is a malefic. Maybe Jupiter might be hanging a little bit. But as we see it, we have the 6th lord in an angle in the 1st house. And this person definitely deals with enemies quite often, or has. If a weak lord of the 6th house is aspected by a malefic planet, or if it is located in between malefic planets, this also indicates trouble from enemies. So that would be if we had a Papakatara yoga here. If we had Saturn hemmed in between Sun and Mars, we could speak to this. If the lord of the 6th house is located in the 6th, 8th, or 12th house, and in its sign of debilitation, or inimical sign, or eclipsed, and the lord of the Lagna is strong, the enemy cannot succeed ultimately. Now, essentially what that's describing is that if the 6th lord is weak, as we discussed previously, that the enemy cannot succeed. But that is also dependent on the Lagna lord being stronger. And so we do have the Lagna lord in a neutral dignity in the 12th house, but we have the 6th lord in neutral dignity in the 1st house. But what we see is that the Lagna lord is hemmed in between benefic planets. So the Lagna lord has gained support from Venus and Mercury from this particular principle. And we see the Lagna lord is gained aspected fairly strongly by Jupiter, with Jupiter's full-on 9th aspect, because Jupiter's at 17 degrees and the Sun is at 16 degrees. So again, it is in the 12th house, but it's getting quite a bit of benefic support. Okay, now a few more. If the lord of the 6th house is with malefics, in a malefic navamsha, in its sign of debilitation, or in an eclipse state, and without the aspect or association with benefics, one's familial community may not be satisfying. So let's consider that one more time. If the lord of the 6th house is with malefics, so if we would have had this Saturn with Mars or Sun or Rahu, in a malefic navamsha, and this Saturn, let's see, so it's in a great friend sign in the navamsha, so it doesn't fall in that. That 6th lord would need to be in a malefic navamsha. And if it was in a sign of debilitation or eclipsed, this would give difficulty being satisfied by one's family, extended family, because the 6th house is often related to one's extended family. If the lord of the 9th house is located in the 6th, and is aspected by the lord of the 6th house, and the lord of the 6th house is located with Saturn and Mars, one may lose due to fire and theft. So essentially what this is saying is 9th lord in the 6th, we would have the 9th lord in the 6th, and aspected by the 6th house lord, and the 6th house lord being located with Saturn and Mars, that one may lose due to fire and theft. Now why would that be? Well, Mars is fire. Mars is also said to represent thieves. Saturn is also said to represent thieves in this regard. And we see the 9th house, the lord of fortunes, in the 6th. So we lose our fortunes, right? Due to what? These influences of Saturn and Mars. Now again, these things can be extended to other areas of life, but you just need to think about them and contemplate them a bit to see how that works. I think by the time we get done with this series, you understand. Now, interestingly enough, at the very end of this chapter, one of the things that is stated is that this science should be divulged to a theist and not an atheist. It's interesting that that's put just at the end of this chapter on the 6th house. So contemplate that. Why might that be the case? That this science should be divulged to a theist and not to an atheist. I've been thinking about that for a while. But anyway, So again, refer to AshevilleVedicAstrology.com for the extended notes on principles from Sarvarta Chintamani dealing with the 6th house. And as we've seen, we've outlined here, this person does have enemies to deal with, having the 6th Lord in the 1st house. But we see that even though that 1st Lord goes into the 12th, and this person was almost imprisoned, not quite. Why? Because they had great counsel, Venus and Jupiter, impacting that sun, the Lord of the Ascendant. They had Mercury, which is a planet that does pretty good research and is able to manage life's difficulties when he's delighted by Venus, as we see here in this chart. Now the sun is starving, or I should say thirsting, because this is happening in a water sign in Cancer, this Venus and this Mercury. However, the sun is benefiting by these benefic influences, all to the 12th house. We have to remember that the 12th house deals with the results of our enemies' actions. 6th house is our enemies. 8th house are how the battles go, how our battles go. And the 12th house are the results of our enemies' actions. So, Ascendant Lord in the 12th, this person retires, goes on retreat instead of facing his enemies. It's a fascinating chart, fascinating study in that regard. Okay, well, thank you for tuning in. This will conclude our brief synopsis of influences to the 6th house and how to assess the 6th house. Next up, we'll be looking at the 7th house, which deals with relationships, sexuality, business partnerships, and also that mirror, that thing that we project onto others that we're meant to make peace with and bring into more consciousness within our lives. Those of you who are Jungian analysts or into psychology in that way, the 6th house is an excellent house to study in that regard. Pardon me, did I say 6th house? I meant the 7th house, so hopefully I got it right. All right, so be well, and we'll be in touch soon.